Hello again. Thank you very much for joining me here on Movie Ninja. Tonight I'm going to be talking about the 2016 film Don't Breathe. This film focuses on three thieves and their attempts to rob a old blind man for a quick payday, but very quickly things go awry. So, Don't Breathe, in and of itself, is an interesting mix of a unique premise, decent acting, powerful, thriller moments, but it's underdone in the second half by certain thematic changes. So what do I mean by that? At the very beginning of the film, it seems very straightforward. They plan to rob this old man. They think he's an easy target, and the old man realizes that, he's the victim of a home invasion and then goes to defend himself. Okay. I felt that what would have better served this movie is that if there was a bit more tug of war. So these are three young people that obviously they're thieves, so, we're not really supposed to root for them. I understand that. But the idea being that, with a home invasion, that this is something to where their victim, their mark, in retaliation, and where this is arguable of like the blind man, that's the character's moniker, by the way, where the blind man escalates the violence. You know what? You could debate with someone, hey, he has every single right to defend himself and his property any way he sees fit because of these home invaders. And other people could argue, well, these are three young people that, they're not doing anything good, but at the same time, did they deserve to die? And, you can have a little bit, as the film begins, you can have a little bit of banter back and forth as to how this could have gone and how this could have matured into something of a Cape Fear with Robert De Niro style thriller, or maybe even something from Alfred Hitchcock. Because like, who are we supposed to root for? Because due to reasons, they cannot immediately leave this house that they've invaded. And so the blind man, if it's merely for self-preservation, would have a like not many people would argue that he's well within his rights to do with what he wants. But then an unfortunate character revelation occurs right around the half-hour mark, actually fairly early in the film, actually, to where we know exactly who the bad guy is. And even with theft, it's established very early on in the film that, they don't seek to harm anyone. They're not killers. They only steal appliances that are quite obviously insured from the houses that they steal. They never steal cash because that would cause a consequence, like a legal consequence, to where they could possibly, if they are ever caught, they could be much more severely punished. So they have all of these rules and personal regulations that they follow, to where they could theoretically do this a number of times and then they could leave the Detroit area. So you could even make the argument, what they're doing isn't good, but we understand more or less like the mindset of like doing this. We're only doing this to remove ourselves from, this toxic environment of poverty. Okay, one could make the argument if so inclined. And as I mentioned before, if so inclined, not a whole lot of people could really argue, well, they're trying to victimize an old blind army veteran. So like, hey, all of these different elements that say like, hey, in and of itself, this is not a good idea. Like, granted that it's clear that all of our primary characters are not of sound judgment, that being said, where the film begins, you have some interesting moral ambiguity, but with this character revelation, no spoilers, with this character revelation, the blind man very quickly becomes the villain, you know? The thematic change right at that half-hour mark makes it to where we know who we're technically supposed to root for. But just, as I mentioned, I'm not gonna belabor this. As I mentioned, that's not the film that we got. The film that we got is like 3 young people go into an old man's house, and they get more than what they were bargaining for. So I should be able to make a review just based on that. However, there's also significant gaps in logic to where when this revelation comes on screen, just like so many I had so many questions. How did this happen? When did this happen? How has this been able to go on for so long? Just and I can kind of understand where. No, I can't. I cannot. The changes that were made to the overall theme are to the detriment overall of the movie. And aside from that, the film ends, for me, in a kind of disappointing note. In the first half, you're still able to maintain... What about all that good stuff that you said at the beginning? All that's true. Just because I didn't like something doesn't mean I'm going to trash a film and say that the production values were bad and the acting was blah, 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 blah. It didn't work for me, though. I didn't find... whereas something... if you were to stay on course with the primary premise that you had at the very beginning, and I wonder if the writers found that particular a gray, foggy, morally ambiguous sort of climax and ending. Maybe it was a little bit beyond their grasp. So instead, this became a horror film without a monster until it had a monster. So, with everything that I've said, this is a film that works very much on a technical level, and as I mentioned, it actually has some decent performances. Stephen Lang, in particular, really does a fantastic job of creating an ominous and intimidating primary villain, but his characterization, and that's not on the actors. That's not on the execution isn't on the actors at all. But the way that it turns out disappointed me. First half is okay. Second half, there's a bit more of that cat and mouse. I didn't know immediately who was in the director's chair for this. For a while, I thought it was Eli Roth, because at a certain point, it goes, instead of from cat and mouse to violence porn. And there was a few times where it starts to, going into the second half of the film, the pacing starts to lag for me. So that didn't help either, overall, for my enjoyment of the movie. So, what's my overall score for Don't Breathe? As I mentioned, it's still technically sound. You know, you have decent production, you have decent acting, but the story... The story lost me, going into the second half, and especially when, to me, I also felt that there were pacing issues to where I checked twice, this film is less than an hour and a half, but I had to check twice as to, where I was, and where the film was, on its timeline, and I was like, wow, how much more of this are we gonna have? So yeah, overall the second half really didn't work for me, and just the way that they recharacterized the blind man to be the obvious monstrous villain, Yeah, with all that being said, I give Don't Breathe 2016 a 5 out of 10. I I wish I could be a bit more generous with it, but I'd also be dishonest in how much I actually enjoyed the film. And like I said, there's a lot that is still going for this, but thematically, that's where the film lost me. So if I have to put my own honest opinion out there, I say that it's not a big failure, but for me, the ending kind of like failed on a number of different ways. So that's my review of 2016 Don't Breathe. I'm actually thinking, as of the time of the recording of this review, the sequel is actually premiering. So I'm actually wondering if this is a case where people going into the sequel would probably be better off without seeing the first installment. But I'm going to have to see it. Then I can make that judgment call. So anyways, thank you very much for joining me here on Movie Ninja. I appreciate it. Have you guys seen the film? What do you think? Do you think I was too hard on it? You know, if you do, leave it, leave a comment. Bear in mind that, hey, if we're going to disagree, let's be civil about it, okay? Anyways, thanks again for joining me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.